Hey everyone, today I'm going to quickly talk to you about figurative language and mythical magical creatures. So I'm going to do this on my iPad, and I'm also going to film from my laptop so that you can see me. If you have any questions, please email me or join office hours. Okay, we're now in our memoir unit, and a memoir is a piece of literature that's a narrative, and it's when an author writes about his or her experiences. So he or she picks a specific memory and writes about it and explores the emotions that he or she felt. Next week, we're going to be reading a memoir by Maya Angelou, and so when we do get to it, we're going to be dissecting it for narrative techniques. And one of the narrative techniques that we'll be looking at next week is figurative language and how the memoir uses figurative language to impact the reader. So we're going to do a quick review of figurative language that you already know, and we're also going to add some new pieces today as well. So follow along. This will be a 2-day activity, and if you finish early, please go on to enrichment and give the enrichment assignment a try that's themed on Wizard of Oz. That one is identifying types of figurative language. Okay, so on page 1, you guys are going to take a moment to draw your very own mythical magical creature. I'm theming this whole thing on fun creatures that could be something that exists, like a unicorn or like a fairy or a narwhal, or you could create something brand new of your own. Up to you. So right here, I'm going to take a moment to draw my creature. And it's going to be important that you give your creature a name, because today we're going to be describing our creature using different types of figurative language. So since we're coming up on fall, and I have fall on my mind, my creature is going to, there we go. Okay, so your creature is going to be the basis of our practice with figurative language techniques. So let's go ahead and take a look at our first type of figurative language. So our first type of figurative language is alliteration, and alliteration is when you have the same sound or letter at the beginning of closely connected words. So my example for you was, hippogriffs can be found near lakes, lairs, and little locks. La, 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 la. So here, what you're going to do is you are going to describe where your creature can be found using alliteration. So think about 3 or 4 different places where your creature can be found that start with the same letter. And these can be silly, but we're just practicing the types of figurative language. So I'm going to put bumpkins. Okay, they can be silly. It doesn't have to be super serious, but we are using the same letter at the beginning of closely related words. Okay, so let's take a look at our next one. Our next figurative language technique is called an allusion with an A, not illusion with an I, which is like a magic trick, but an allusion with an A, and this is a reference to a person, place, idea, a book, someone of cultural or political significance or historical significance. So when a piece of literature is referencing something else, then that's called an allusion with an A. So oftentimes, like Disney does this, where they'll have like spin-off series and they'll be referencing other movies. That would be an allusion. So what you're going to do for your practice is you are going to make a reference to someone who shares personality traits with your creature using an allusion. So for example, hippogriffs are known to be as energetic as Sidney Crosby. So here We're making a comparison with like or as. We know that's a simile, but also we're making a reference to Sidney Crosby, who is a person of significance to Pittsburgh, is a person of significance in the sports world. So this is an allusion with an A. So think about a person that shares a quality with your creature to create an allusion. Okay, so if bumpkins are as flashy as Lady Gaga, that is an allusion. You know who this is. She has cultural significance allusion. Okay, next we have an analogy. And an analogy is a comparison between two things that are different, but there's a similarity that's highlighted between them. So we have two types of analogies. Analogy is the big umbrella, and underneath of it we have two subcategories. We have metaphors, and metaphors compare two different things without the words like or as. So I could say, you are a lion today, if you're being very ferocious on the soccer field or something like that. If I say you are something, that's a metaphor. We also have similes. And similes compare things using like or as. So I could say, you're as ferocious as a lion on the soccer field today. Both metaphors and similes compare things, so they are both analogies. The difference is using like or as. So today you're going to pick a random object and relate it to your creature in a way that uses an analogy cleverly. So you could either use a simile or a metaphor here. So hippogriffs can be compared to refrigerators because they're usually always running. Okay, this is like a little play on words. This would be an example of an analogy. So think of an object that you can compare to your creature. Again, could be a metaphor or simile here. Okay, so I'm comparing mine to the latest iPhone. And so this would be an example of a simile. Okay, we're going to do one more here together.
At the bell, Mr. Tate's second period class should report to room 202.
And that's going to be an anaphora.
Mr. Tate's second period class report to room 202.
An anaphora is going to be the repetition of a word or phrase. Snack, snack, snacks. So when you have the same word repeated throughout a sentence or a phrase, it's called an anaphora. Anaphora. So here's an example. Hippogriff's motto is snacks are good, snacks are great, snacks are what we appreciate. So you're going to create a motto for your creature that uses an anaphora. So let's do that one now. fly, fly, fly. This is an anaphora. I have repetition here. Okay, so next up we have assonance. This is probably new to a lot of you this year. Assonance is going to be the repetition of vowel sounds. Vowel sounds A, E, I, O, and U. So let's take a look at the example. Hippogriffs hate cheese, bees, and keys. These all have the same vowel sound. Cheese, bees, and keys. So when an author writes a sentence or a phrase and there are a lot of words near one another that have the same vowel sound, this is on purpose. This is a technique, figurative language technique, that is called assonance. Assonance. And this is probably, like I said, new to us this year. So what you're going to do for creating it is you are going to make a list of things that your creature hates that uses assonance. So again, that example, cheese, bees, keys, has the same E sound, vowel sound. So that's an example. So I'm going to do mine. Pumpkins hate running miles and Harry Styles. Okay, I have a reference to someone of cultural significance, so not only am I using assonance here, but I'm also using an allusion. So 2 in 1. So go ahead and make a list of things that your creature hates that uses assonance. And you can pause this video if you're still thinking and working. I'm just going to move through it, but feel free to pause to move and work at your own pace. Okay, next up, I'm sure you've probably heard of this before. Probably you haven't identified it in text or used it very often, but it is a euphemism. Euphemism. A euphemism is a polite expression that's used instead of harsh words and phrases. So when you're trying to say something that's not so nice in a nice way, it's a euphemism. So we have popular euphemisms that we use in English, ones that people know as soon as you say it, they know what it means. So for example, if we're saying, oh, it's really raining cats and dogs out there, it's not literally raining cats and dogs, but we know that it's raining really hard. That would be a euphemism. Or if someone has to use the bathroom, instead of saying that, someone could say, oh, I have to go powder my nose. That's an example of a euphemism, saying something like not so nice, but in a nice way, a more polite way. So another example, just listing some, if someone is being fired, instead of having their boss come in and say, we're firing you, then someone could say it in a nicer way with a euphemism and say, we're going to have to let you go. It sounds less harsh. It's a little bit more polite when you're using a euphemism. So here I have an example. Hippogriffs don't smell like roses. Okay, that's kind of a nice way of saying they don't smell very good. They smell bad. That would be an example of a euphemism. So you're going to come up with a euphemism about your creature. Now, if you want to, feel free to use your resources. So you can Google search like popular euphemisms, and you can browse and refresh your memory on some of them and see if any of them fit for your creature. So I put people who enjoy peace and quiet most likely wouldn't enjoy bumpkins. That's like a polite way of saying that they're really obnoxious and loud and noisy. Okay, next up, and again, feel free to pause, work at your own pace. Next up, we have hyperbole, and hyperbole is an extreme exaggeration. Extreme exaggeration, and this one should be a review. We should know this one. So, for example, hippogriff's wings are 10 million times larger than birds' wings. There's no way that they're literally 10 million times larger. That's an extreme exaggeration. That would be an example of a hyperbole. Hyperbole. So go ahead and exaggerate something about your creature. And again, these can be silly. They don't need to be like super serious. So here I put, pumpkins are the universe's best singers. So that's an extreme exaggeration. That is a hyperbole. Okay, next up is irony, and irony is the big category. Irony has 3 subcategories. There are different types of irony. So irony is when the opposite of what is expected happens. So the first type is situational irony. So situational irony is when what you expect to happen in a situation is kind of like the opposite of what's actually happening. So an example of situational irony would be a tow truck being broken down on the side of the road and needing extra assistance. That would be unexpected because the tow truck is the one that's usually going to help broken down cars. So if it's broken down itself, then that would be situational irony. So that's the first type of irony. Next up, we have verbal irony. Verbal irony is also known as sarcasm. So verbal irony is when the opposite of what you're saying is what you mean. So, for example, you could say, "Oh, I really love that shirt on you." And if you're saying it in a certain type of tone and you're suggesting the opposite, that would be verbal irony. "I'm so glad it's raining today. That's just great." Verbal irony, you're meaning the opposite of what you're saying. And then the last type of irony is going to be dramatic irony. And dramatic irony is whenever the reader or the audience knows something about the situation or the events or the characters that the characters don't know. So a great example of this is like any pretty much horror movie ever. So the viewer of the horror movie is watching it and you see the killer go and hide in the shed and you know that he's in there. And then there are people who are trying to get away from him. They're like, "Oh, what do? We should go hide in the shed." And then you, the viewer, are like, "No, don't go in there. That's where he is." That is an example of dramatic irony. You, the viewer, know what's going on when the characters don't. You know a piece of information that they don't know. And we're going to see a lot of dramatic irony in literature this year where we have some piece of information and the characters don't. And oftentimes it's very frustrating for the reader and it creates an emotional response from the reader because you want the characters to act a certain type of way or do something specific based on the information that you know and they don't. So it's fun. So that's dramatic irony. So for our activity today, we're going to use verbal irony. So you are going to write something sarcastic about your creature where you're saying one thing but you actually mean the other. It's verbal irony. Okay. Next up, we have what's called an onomatopoeia. This is probably a review. You probably know this piece of figurative language. So an onomatopoeia is known as a sound word, like ah, or oh, or oh, man, woohoo, yee. These are all onomatopoeias, words that represent sounds. So this one's fun. You get to come up with your sound that your creature makes, and then you're going to put it in here as an onomatopoeia. So, for example, I have the sound hippogriffs make is neigh. So you're going to come up with a sound that your creature makes. Make them fun, make them interesting, and then we'll write that in here. So go ahead and do that now. Okay, have my example. Next up, we have, this might be new, an oxymoron. An oxymoron can also be referred to as a paradox. So this is when two seemingly contradictory things are true at the same time. It creates an oxymoron or a paradox. So, for example, hippogriffs love peaches, but they hate fruit. That would be an oxymoron. Those are two contradictory facts. They kind of go against one another. So you're going to create an oxymoron or a paradox about your creature. Again, we're just having fun with it, just reviewing figurative language, so these can be a little bit silly, and that's okay. Alright, and we are on to our last page here. Next up, we have personification. This is, this is definitely a review. You should know this one. So, personification is when you give human-like characteristics to an object. So, for example, hippogriffs usually talk about the weather because they find it extremely interesting. It's an animal, it's probably not talking about weather, but I gave them a human-like quality or characteristic. This is an example of personification. So, in our memoir we're about to read, we will definitely see personification. We will see the personification of the setting of the memoir. So, we're going to have a store that kind of comes to life a little bit, and Maya Angelou is going to have some really cool descriptions of the store that have human-like qualities. So let's create something that is definitely a human-like quality for our creatures. Okay, we have 2 left and then we're done. Let's take a look at puns. Puns. A pun is a play on words. So puns are fantastic. Usually in class, whenever I ask you guys if you have questions and no one has any, I also ask you if you have any puns to share because they're fun. So a pun is going to be when there's a word that has multiple different meanings and you're playing with both of those meanings at the same time. So for example, hippogriffs fly through books when they read. Hippogriffs fly, they do actually fly. So this is like them moving quickly. So I'm using both meanings at once and that's creating a pun. So if you want to, use your resources. You can Google search like popular puns and see if any of them make sense for your creature. But try and think of one yourself. And again, in order to create a pun, you are going to think of words that have multiple meanings to them and then you're going to see if you can use both of those meanings at the same time. Okay, so take some time now and see if you can come up with any puns. Oops, that's a highlighter. Okay, and we're on to the very last piece of figurative language, and this one I know is going to be new to you guys this year. And this one is called a synecdoche. Synecdoche. It is pronounced much differently than what it looks like. So my suggestion would be, because we're using this, remember, as like a study tool and a resource for us to go back and visit it throughout the year when we're doing things with figurative language. My suggestion would too be just write in a pronunciation here that's going to help you remember how to say it. Synecdoche. Okay, a synecdoche is when you're making assumptions on a group based on an individual, or you're making assumptions about an individual based on a group. So for example, if I know a friend of mine who's on the football team and he is super silly and he loves making jokes, and I say, oh, all those football players are always joking around, I'm making an assumption about the giant group based on one person that I know. And it's not always correct. Usually it's not. And that would be an example of a synecdoche. On the flip side, if I know that cheerleaders in general have a lot of spirit and they're usually very excited, and then I single out one person who's on a cheerleading squad that I don't know, and I say, oh, I'm sure that she's very energetic and excited all of the time. Well, again, that's a synecdoche. That's an assumption that I'm making about one person based on how I view the entire group. So, for example, Chester the hippogriff will want a peach for lunch. Just because hippogriffs in general like peaches doesn't mean that Chester will like them. Maybe he has an allergy. And again, we can be kind of silly with this, but it's just the general idea of what a synecdoche is. So you're going to make up something about the species as a whole that you created, and then also with your illustration, you named your particular creature, this one that we're looking at. So with that, just think about what is a general assumption that someone might make about your one individual creature based on what they know about the group, or vice versa. And again, this is all fiction, this is all, you're making this up, but we're just doing an example of making assumptions based on groups to single or single to groups. Okay, so I put, some might believe Chester enjoys Halloween Oreos just because pumpkins usually do. And that's an example of a synecdoche. So there you have it. We did a review of figurative language. Some of these are new. So hopefully you are following along and you feel comfortable with it. If you don't, feel free to email me any questions you might have, or you can join office hours from 3:05 to 3:20 with questions. But this should now be complete, so please make sure that you're submitting this today before 3:30 to get credits. Okay, and like I said, we're going to be identifying all of this figurative language in our text. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by our author Maya Angelou next week. So if some of these are new to you, you might want to be reviewing them in the background so that when we get to it and we identify them, it's easy for us to do so. Okay, I will talk to you guys later, and I hope you guys had fun creating your mythical magical creatures with figurative language.